You see, me and Archer, we're the bad guys. We enforce the rules. Now, while the rules may not be perfect, they're really not so bad.
Exactly. What's the alternative?
The alternative, Mr. Marston, is hell.
Agent Edgar Ross, the face of the newly established Bureau of Investigation. If there was ever a single person that was hated the absolute most throughout the entire series, it would be Edgar Ross. Sadistic, cunning, manipulative, and a cold-blooded killer. Today we're going to be taking a deeper look at this man, his actions, and what exactly was at stake here. He was given one job, and perhaps through a personal vendetta, the glory of wiping out the entire legacy of the Van der Linde gang, or perhaps a mixture of both. Ross forcefully pulled John Marston out from his life of living peacefully on the ranch of Beecher's Hope, holding his wife and son as prisoners, captives of the Bureau, and so John delivered what was asked of him, the heads of his former gang members who were still committing crimes, wreaking havoc on the people of New Austin. Once John brings them to Ross, dead or alive, then John would be allowed to return to his life as a rancher with his family, providing him with the new life and the freedom of his wife and son. Before we get into the actions of Ross, there's some things we need to explore more. The world, for instance, of this game is drastically different from that of Red Dead Redemption 2. The federal government's desire to have a stronger presence in this region is what primarily kicks the events of this game off. They held little power in states such as New Austin, so they sent in men like Edgar Ross to establish authority. They were meant to work with the local politicians to ensure the creation of federal power within the region and do it in a way that would not cause any sort of rebellion or revolt from the public. We know the federal government had already experienced some sort of pushback and some prior failed attempts because John is treated as a threat to their ways of life, working with the Marshal of Armadillo and any other contact he meets attempting to handle the threat of the Williamson gang. All see John as someone working for the feds, just another big city man from New York coming to impose the laws of their civilization on them. Now, we don't see the man known as Nate Johns, but that's a very important name, and it's someone who's important to mention because Nate Johns is running for state governor of New Austin, with his big promise of cleaning up the state. No more bandits, no more murderers, no more thieves, or any fear of gangs. Nate Johns begins to promise the heads of the most dangerous gang leaders as an incentive for the public to rally behind him and elect him into office. This created the perfect opportunity for the Bureau of Investigation to step in on behalf of the federal government and help Nate Johns deliver his promise of cleaning up the state, creating a mutually beneficial relationship. Nate Johns becomes state governor of New Austin, the area becomes much more civilized and tamed thanks to the help of largely the federal backing it received through the Bureau, who now had newly established connections with the politicians such as Nate Johns, showing just how effective they could be at providing greater security and tighter laws through modernization. They may well have also had some of the politicians indebted to them. We helped you achieve the status you wanted, we'll help you keep that position and provide you with the resources you need, just in exchange, establish a bureau office in the area, or maybe sign specific laws into effects that essentially give the federal government oversight of things. Whatever the exact circumstances were, on the surface, Nate Johns would be seen as successful to the public, when behind closed doors, it was really thanks to the Bureau and the feds the public were so passionately against. We should also delve a little into Ross's background. Because of Red Dead Redemption 2 being a prequel to the first game, there's some knowledge the second game gives us in terms of Ross's experience with criminals, specifically members of the Van der Linde gang. I went a little more into detail with this in a previous video, somewhat comparing Agent Milton to his subordinate, Agent Ross. So if you want to watch that, you're more than welcome to, but the bottom line here is Ross witnessed firsthand criminals can't and won't be negotiated with, especially members of the Van der Linde gang who chose to die with their leader than to take whatever deal they were given and a fair chance to escape. Ross witnessed Milton fail time and time in stopping these criminals until finally they killed him. He died at a time when it appeared the gang was done for. Van Horn was crawling with agents, there was no shortage of manpower or firepower, and yet still, Milton was killed. Never underestimate your enemy, never let your guard down, never give them a chance to run. Ross's personal experience with the gang and criminals as a whole gave him a very black and white perspective. They broke the law. They will pay for the crimes they choose to commit. coming into the region to New Austin on behalf of the government with instructions to do whatever it took to establish more power for them, and Nate Johns wanting every criminal's head in the area as part of his promise for his political campaign. There was hell to pay, and Ross was going to be the judge and executioner.
We've done this little deal for your freedom in exchange for all your men from your old gang. You gave us Williamson and Escuela. We still don't have Vanderlyn.
It's an interesting thought that if John had not killed Micah, maybe Micah would have been the one forced to hunt down everyone in order to earn his freedom, allowed to live just a little longer. John's killing of Micah, while directly attributing to him leaving a literal trail of bodies right to him, could have also been more power for the course. John wasn't running with Dutch or any type of gang for that matter. While he might have seemed to have turned over a new leaf by applying for a bank loan, buying some land, building a house, and trying to become a rancher, you're telling me this changed man found the time to leave his family and go on a revenge quest? To take the life of someone that he hasn't seen or heard of in at least half a decade? No, these people, they don't change. With a philosophy and an outlook on criminals not too different from Agent Milton's, the first-hand experience he had dealing with the Vanderlyn gang, as well as any other criminals he had to hunt down and apprehend during his time as a Pinkerton detective agent, the actions John committed both off and on screen during the second game's epilogue and full reign to civilize an entire state, Edgar Ross was given everything to not only do as he so pleased, but there was no restrictions on him. Whether if John was a target for Nate Johns or not, Ross bringing John out of hiding and forcing him to hunt down Bill Williamson and Dutch was almost perfect. For him anyways. The context of Red Dead Redemption 2 shows John and Dutch had some kind of contact during 1907 when the two of them and Micah were on top of Mount Hagen, which is an event that could have been framed by Ross or the Bureau as Dutch and John working together, or if not working together, then there was at least some evidence against John for committing murder. Whether if they chose to hold these charges over John's head, some charges of prostitution towards Abigail, or perhaps both, what's certain is even though ethically it was wrong, using Abigail and Jack as leverage, punishing them for John's crimes was a smart move. With John's forced cooperation, Ross spared the Bureau of quite an amount of time and overall resources in terms of manpower, firepower, and what was legally allowed for them to do internationally. I don't think any of the agents of the Bureau would have been allowed to cross over into Mexico and bring down Javier and Bill the way that John did. There would have been a lot more pushback from the Mexican locals who already had less than favorable views on Americans, especially American lawmen, plus the clearance of the Mexican government to allow American officials to even enter their country. It would have been a much bigger, larger ordeal. It's much simpler for a single man to sneak in and operate without any known connections. And John wasn't even someone who just lived like an outlaw, knowing how someone trying to stay one step of the law was thinking or moving, but he was uniquely familiar with how Bill and Dutch operated. No one would be as qualified or as successful as hunting the two of these men down as John would be. He knew how they thought, where they would go, what they would do, and he was willing to do whatever it took. It was a very me versus them type of situation. My new life versus my old one. A metaphorical killing off my demons type of scenario. In a way, if Ross wanted to acknowledge it or not, John did in fact change. His Achilles heel was his wife and son. I think he could have easily ran off the moment Ross and Archer let him free, but as we've seen with Jack's kidnapping by Bronte, not only did John love his wife and son, but he felt incredibly responsible for anything that happened to Jack as a result of the life John has chosen to live. Hitting this gray area of Ross's ethics where he sees nothing but criminals, putting Abigail and Jack in the same category as John. Kind of how Milton put everyone within the Vanderlyn gang as killers when they all chose to stand by Dutch's side instead of turning on him, punishing them as sins for the father who won't change, when in fact, John has. His priorities are his family and the ranch. Assuming John had not done anything since the killing of Micah, he had to have been living a calm and peaceful life ranching for at least a year or so. With over a year of peace and silence, John had to have this immense false sense of security that shattered his life and optimistic view on the future into a million pieces the moment Ross and Archer showed up. The question of does everyone eventually have to pay for their crimes doesn't just apply here to John, but people in general. Marston would have ended up getting away with everything. Born and bred to be an outlaw, killing and robbing indiscriminately whoever came across his path so long as he had to make sure that his ends were met. John is also ruthless and quite brutal. In the epilogue of Red Dead Redemption 2, when the Marstons are riding through Strawberry, they found themselves down there trying to escape the possible revenge that may befall them. John was said to have killed a man strictly for looking at him wrong. Eventually this does catch up to him, but it's just an example of him going a little bit too far for something as trivial as getting a side eye. This brutality and ruthlessness of John is also continued in the first game. The context is a little bit different. Obviously his family's at stake and he doesn't care much for anyone else that really gets into his path, but it goes to show just how morally gray John can really be. He's got one goal in mind and he can be quite selfish in doing whatever it takes to achieve said goal. So, what was really at stake for Ross with him getting John to do all his dirty work for him? Honestly, besides him being seen as good or honest within the context of giving John a true, genuine chance to redeem himself, constantly giving him false hope, talking down to him, or mocking him and the situation his wife and son are in, something he does a lot of. He's got quite a few notable conversations about it, betraying his twisted sense of humor of having won over John. I think his joke of Abigail being killed in a prison riot after John had already killed Dutch, which would have meant John did everything for the Bureau for absolutely no reason at all, is definitely a noteworthy one. But if you pay close attention to all the agents' remarks towards John at Abigail and John's expense, when they're all riding to finally take down Dutch, I think takes the cake. Ross mentions John's flawed philosophy of Dutch's gang back when John was riding with him, doing more for the people than the government ever did. Ross rebuttals with John should learn to read before speaking on ethics, and then John responds with he should learn to shoot people in the front instead of the back. Prior to this, all of the agents were commenting on how hard Abigail works as a prostitute.
Don't speak to me!
You're really an ungrateful slug, Marston. Instead of punishing you for your crimes, we are giving you a chance to kill the men who betrayed you.
You didn't have to punish my wife, too!
Oh, please. She's hardly innocent.
Don't you talk about her like that!
Oh, I would never talk ill of dear Abby. Do you call her Abby or Abigail? I prefer Abby. No, I like the woman. A little rough for my taste, but very pleasant.
I can't wait to put a bullet in your head!
If need be, you can always send your wife back out to work. I hear she works hard.
Go to hell!
It's not so much a deep conversation or one that really takes place during a cutscene, but it's enough of a back and forth here to really put on full display the nature of the relationship here. There is no mistake, there's no mutual respect from one side to the other. They're all being dragged into the same fight for the same goal with different incentives behind that goal. No one would care less if John died while fighting alongside these men or if it went the other way. There was really nothing Ross could lose. The ball was in his court, the state was cracking down harder than ever on dangerous criminals, and the federal government was willing to supply whatever necessary to extend its influence and reach. If John ever went too far or did something that may not have been sanctioned by the Bureau, John's handlers could have easily used his actions as further proof criminals don't change. It's in their blood. It's better to get rid of them while you still can. Regardless of how old they've gotten or how much time has passed since their criminal days, they're incapable of being civil. Unless we at some point find out whether if Nate Johns or any other politician had it out for people like John or John specifically, we can't say more beyond that John was very much an expendable pawn. Perhaps there was a personal vendetta behind targeting him, some kind of payback for killing a superior, and so Ross wanted to wipe the legacy of the whole Vanderlyn gang clean, saying the entire state was clean with no criminals hiding out undetected, or quite possibly a blend of all of those reasons. I like to think of Ross as a metaphor for the government. The hell there is to pay for running all sorts of havoc and chaos, punishment for everything you have ever done that came at the safety of or peace of mind of other people. There's always a reckoning you'll have to face at some point of time, and that reckoning cares little for a change in priorities, a change in way of living, mentality, or a newly established family. It's their world now. And just as they had so many cower in fear, now it's their turn to feel that indescribable feeling of terror. There's no one coming to help you, there's no one coming to save you. John's death was and continues to be one of the saddest moments in video game history, almost getting away with everything he's ever done. Forced back into his old ways and using his brutal methods for what would be the greater good this time. It truly was a redemption story that unfortunately was never a real one. John said Ross should learn to shoot people in the front, and as luck would have it, he came and turned on John. He possibly knew Ross and the law would always be coming after him. I want to conclude this video with thanking you for watching, especially if you stuck it all the way out into the end. Let me know your thoughts and your perspective on this different take of Agent Ross. I think if he wasn't so sadistic and personal, dangling, hanging John or killing John for everything he's ever done, or making comments of visiting Abigail or Jack whenever John gives them a little lip, then what Ross does would be seen a lot more black and white. I don't think people would be so much hung up on him being evil. Not to justify his actions, I'm just saying logically he did create a win-win situation for himself, and if he wasn't constantly looking down to him, then it just would have been seen as the bitter end that John probably always had coming. But let me know what you think, and like always, if there's anything you want me to cover, by all means feel free to suggest it or recommend it down below. And until the next video, maybe watch one of these other ones in the meantime.